Hi, everyone, and warmly welcome to this webinar on women, peace, and security. My name is Anna Sundström, and I am the Secretary General of the Olof Palme International Center. And together with the International Peace Bureau and the International Trade Union Confederation, ITUC, the Olof Palme Center took an initiative a few months back to once again highlight the concept of common security. And we have launched a series of webinars to dig into the security issues of our time and how the concept launched in 1982 by the Commission on Disarmament and Security Issues led by Olof Palme can guide us, this concept of common security, how it can guide us for the future, how to tackle the security issues that our world faces today. As mentioned in a series of webinars, we're digging a little bit deeper into the modern security threats, of course, climate being one of these very important issues that we've also highlighted throughout the series of webinars. And today, we are going to look into women, peace, and security. Women's equal participation and leadership and the empowerment of women and girls is, of course, of critical importance to promote peace, preventing conflicts, and enabling recovery and building resilience. But women continue to be underrepresented at all levels of decision-making worldwide, and the participation of women in peace negotiations is still close to non-existent. So the global community continues to overspend also on military action while under-investing in gender equality and thereby putting the world at risk of renewed conflicts instead of promoting peace and stability. And to discuss these issues today, we have with us a very prominent panel. We have Mrs. Linde, the Minister of Foreign Affairs here in Sweden, Maritza, who is Ambassador and Deputy Permanent Representative of Costa Rica to the United Nations, and also not the least Trisha Shetty, who is the CEO of SheSays and also one of the Commission members in the new Common Security Initiative for 2022. You have also been very active in the Paris Peace Forum. And I would like to start with you, Trisha. As a commission member, we've put together this new commission to launch a new report on common security this coming April. And as I mentioned, we're digging into a few of the security issues that our world faces today. In your view, how is this initiative timely, and why is it of importance to our world today?
Thank you, Anna, and to all of you who have gathered here today. I think what strikes me most in all of the work that we've had at the Commission is one, that all the commissioners are showing up themselves. They're not sending their representatives, regardless of whether they have to head UNAIDS or other organizations. It's also that there is a recognition that we're talking about common security because we're living in times of deep insecurity, of deep fraction, where, you mentioned that we have modern security threats, but there's also a threat of failed leadership, a crisis of failed leadership that we are witnessing, which is why I think the topic is so timely, because we have the data that says if you include women in peacekeeping processes, they're that much more likely to succeed. If you include them in negotiative processes, it's that much more likely to be sustainable. So we have all this data, but yet we see the systematic exclusion. So the work that we're doing at the Olof Palme Center, to me, gives me hope during these times of crisis because of an acknowledgement of what the common insecurities are, and critically a will to propose solutions, tangible solutions that's going to change this. Because what we're lacking right now is political will to change the current reality that we're living in. And to just wrap it up, also the question of accessibility, right? This is something that I spoke about, is when we talk about these things, these conversations about women, peace and security, it has to come with an acknowledgement of that more often than not, the people who are having these conversations are not living in times of deep insecurity, of peace. So when we have these spaces, conversations in sanitized settings, where we don't have to worry about someone is going to come attack us, someone is going to kidnap our family members for the work that we're doing or what we're saying, we have to also then advocate that much more, with that much more intensity, for those living in insecurity. So we will touch upon a lot of that later, but I just wanted to say that I'm really heartened by the work that we're doing at the Advisory Council to push a report that we really hope is going to have change in the lives of people, back home, for me in India, who, when I can look at people on the streets and say, you know what, this report is actually going to change something in your daily life.
Thank you very much. And for all of you following this, of course, you can also follow the work of the Commission on commonsecurity.org. We have a special website for this, where you can also find the previous webinars in this series. And as Trisha also mentioned, the importance of political will, and also the emphasis on dialogue and cooperation. And I know that this is, of course, also something that lies close to the heart of the Swedish foreign minister, to continue to push for multilateralism and the importance of dialogue in a time where the trust deficit is seems to be increasing in various aspects. And I would like to turn now to you, Linde, and ask you, because women, peace and security, of course, has been on the agenda for quite some time. And we know we have the resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, adopted by the UN Security Council. And last year was its 20th anniversary, if one might say so. We celebrated the 20 years of existence of this resolution. Has there been any progress, would you say? And how has also Sweden been pushing the work on women, peace and security in the footsteps of 1325?
Well, thank you very much, Anna, and thank you for the Palme Center and the other organizers, because this discussion is, of course, very timely. And I think it's important to look back and look ahead, because it's easier to make trends. You can see trends more easy if you also look back. You said 20 years, and the women, peace and security agenda is a good example, because we can feel frustrated that we haven't come a longer way in this. But at the same time, the last 20 years has shown progress. The funding resolution of women, peace and security is, of course, a landmark in itself. It's the first recognition ever of the women's full participation in conflict management, that is a question of international peace and security. And then the work has been taken forward on all levels. By the Security Council, there is an informal working group, the wider UN system, and also by the field operation and the regional actors. I also see that member states has been much more engaged. The first national action plan on women, peace and security was developed in 2005, and now more than 80 countries plans to show how they prioritize and govern their work on the women, peace and security. This development and these efforts are, of course, being monitored by the civil society and the gender experts, and also a growing body of researchers. And Trisha said here in her intervention that we know, we have facts, we have researches that shows how important it is with women in all part of the conflict cycle, before, during, and after a conflict. And I think that this progress that has been made the last 20 years paved the way for more, but the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda is far from where we want it to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. And I know also Sweden as share country, if you could say that. You are the chairperson of the OSCE at this time, that this agenda has also been very important for the Swedish chairmanship in OSCE. If you then look forward, what is it that you and your government would like to see more of, and how are you trying to push this agenda going forward?
Well, thank you. We have really pushed for the women, peace and security, and the as being a part of a feminist government in the feminist foreign policy, to have this issue in all international organizations. And we continuously push it to advance the agenda, including that we are co-chairs of the Council's informal expert group on women, peace and security. We sought to ensure that the Council included the focus on women, peace and security in all decisions and discussion, and invited also female briefers to the Security Council meetings. And I have been briefing the United Nations Security Council twice as chair of the OSCE, and I know that if there are also briefers from the civil society in this issue, the discussion gets much better. And also, I stress this agenda during all my field missions, and I've been visiting all OSCE field missions. There are roughly 15, to get ahead of mission to integrate the women, peace and security agenda in the work. And here I have to say, it's not only women, peace and security. It's also the issue of women's economic empowerment. Because if women are not economic empowered, they don't have the time or the resources to be able to take part in other parts like peace work or conflict resolutions, or taking active part in the society as such. So the women's economic empowerment is like a groundwork to be able to be active also in the women, peace and security. I work very closely with the civil society and women's organization. And as one example, United Nations Women, UN Women, their deputy head, Åsa Regnér, and I went to Kosovo to discuss women, peace and security with all the women organization in a country where they unfortunately has had a lot of experience on conflict and even military conflict. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna, and I'm sure we will come back to importance of civil society and also economic empowerment for women, as I know that these are issues close to heart, Trisha's heart. I also want to say to potential newcomers, warmly welcome to a discussion on women, peace and security, and the importance of a feminist perspective also into the concept of common security. And if there are questions, please put them in the chat box function, and we will make sure to try to pick up a few of the issues. But I would now like to turn to you, Ambassador Chan. And Linde rightly points out that we must also remember that progress has been made during these 20 years, of course. But from your perspective, what are the promises not fulfilled, and what is it that you would like to see a greater emphasis on going forward?
Thank you very much, and greetings from New York to everyone. As you have said, 20 years ago, Resolution 1325 was adopted by the Security Council during the presidency of Namibia, a country of the Global South. And that resolution is now a recurring theme in the Security Council, but is also a theme that belongs to the whole UN membership. Another point that I like to make is that this resolution was adopted 55 years after the foundation of the UN. So we need to take that into perspective, that it took us 5 decades to have a resolution acknowledging the need for the participation and engagement of women and girls in all peace and security processes. And from Costa Rica's perspective, Resolution 1325 is much more than a framework for women's participation in conflict management and resolution. It is about having a seat at the table where decisions are made and having our voices reflected in the final text of our peace and security efforts. So for us, it is urgent to reframe and democratize the WPS agenda. It cannot continue to transfer women into patriarchal structures and enable violence or reinforce militarism. Having said that, please allow me to stress 5 points that I believe are crucial when taking a critical look into the WPS agenda. The first one is the promise of the resolution to increase women's participation. That promise has not been fulfilled. In 2020, women represented almost a quarter of participants in peace processes led or co-led by the UN. And during the last high-level meeting on the total elimination of nuclear weapons, only 1 in 6 speakers was a woman. Despite that small ratio, some of us, Colombia and Costa Rica, did not even get the chance to take the floor. Indeed, when states can send 1 person to a meeting, they almost always send a man, despite the fact that women are often disproportionately affected by the development, use, and trade of weapons. Empowering women and increasing women's participation remains amongst the most effective tools for advancing global peace and security. And second, per the last Secretary's General reports on WPS, there's finally a recognition that excessive levels of global military spending has been lacking in WPS framework. Then again, it took so long to recognize that investing in weapons instead of people have an effect on equality, on the possibilities of women's participation and agency. In fact, there's a study by UN Women that suggests a clear correlation between militarization and gender inequality. More specifically, higher levels of military spending are correlated with lower levels of women's equality in terms of choice, agency, and participation in decision-making during and after conflict. Spending more money on weapons means fewer resources to devote to development initiatives, including those that could have a positive impact on women and could reduce gender inequalities. Therefore, curbing military spending is vital. And let me stress this point. It is vital to ensuring that we are achieving the gender equality that the resolution calls for. And it's also the duty of the Security Council, per Article 26 of the Charter, to reduce military spending and devote those resources to socioeconomic development. That promise has not been fulfilled either. Third, while the emphasis of the WPS agenda is rightly on the participation of women and girls, it falls short in its framing of gender. The resolutions under the WPS agenda define gender in a binary sense, ignoring the vulnerability of trans and gender non-conforming people and individuals of diverse orientations, gender identities, gender expressions, and sex characteristics. The binary framework is especially concerning because we know that LGBTIQ people are a particular risk throughout the conflict cycle. So it is crucial to incorporate a broader understanding of gender throughout the WPS agenda. Fourth, and this is an issue very close to my heart, none of the resolutions on WPS acknowledge widows or widowhood. Now more than ever, it's crucial to address the problems faced by widows. The number of widows have increased over the past few years due to armed violence, armed conflict, violent extremism, natural disasters, migration, epidemics, and now by COVID-19, which has been referred to by some as the widowmaker. The pandemic has left thousands of women newly widowed and thus susceptible to rejection and mistreatment by their families and neighbors. This year, the United Nations estimated that there are more than 250 million women widows worldwide. Despite this, women have shown their resilience by being at the forefront, calling for the cessation of fighting, addressing the root causes of violence, and building sustainable peace. Widows' voices and experiences matter, and I urge you not to address them or label them as victims. I also urge you to collect data for our humanitarian and developing programming in conflict and post-conflict settings. We cannot be complicit in making them invisible and perpetuating gender inequalities. Fifth, and another important point to make, is that we cannot continue to group women with the infamous phrase "women and children," because it suggests that women, like children, lack agency. This perpetuates assumptions about women not being as capable as men. Women are not less capable than men, nor they are helpless victims of conflict. We have our own agency and our own voice. So it is imperative to break that stereotype and do it now. So far, those are the points that I'd like to raise. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And of course, the importance of shifting funds and respond to the socioeconomic crisis that the world now also faces after the corona pandemic is of much importance. So thank you for also raising this perspective. Trisha, may I now turn to you, because we've been talking about, well, the successes and the work that also remains to be done when it comes to the inclusion of women in preventing and also, of course, in handling peace conflict. But when we talk about peace, we often see it as sort of the absence of conflict or absence of military conflict. But from a feminist perspective, thinkers have been sort of rejecting this and also pushed for what they've been calling positive peace, which then includes not just the absence of violence, but also social justice and equality. From your perspective, you often talk about not only human rights, but also human wrongs. What is your perspective on the concept of not only absence of conflict, but positive peace, and also the human wrongs, and how we can make them into human rights?
Thank you so much. And Ambassador Chan, really thank you for the really moving intervention. It's not very often that you get to see representatives of governments just unilaterally call out wrongs. And also thank you, Minister Anne, for your powerful interventions before. I'm glad that you asked me that question, because often when I'm asked to speak about gender equality, they don't want me to speak about inequality, right? Because that makes people uncomfortable. The WPS agenda, Women, Peace and Security agenda, was just referred to. There are 4 pillars in that agenda. There's the prevention, there's the participation, there's protection, and there's relief and recovery. Now, we're living in times where you need to protect gender activists, feminists, climate activists from bad faith state actors. And if that is not called out categorically, and if we look at peace and security in these abstract, generic concepts without calling out the bad faith actors, the people doing work on ground will get disfranchised and lose faith in even any of the good faith actors who don't have the moral gumption to stand by them. Let me be very specific. there's an acknowledgement that when it comes to peace and security, one of the biggest threats of this century that we're living in is going to be climate and forced migration, right? So in India, we've been having the largest protest globally by farmers against the mass corporatization of agriculture. It's a democratic protest. It's, India is the largest democracy world over. And there was a climate activist called Disha Ravi, who was in contact, allegedly, with Greta Thunberg, whom the minister would know well, and everyone would know well. And they basically worked on a toolkit to educate people on what's going on regards the farmers' crisis, why it's an essential movement as part of the climate activism, and why young people and everyone, the global society, needs to mobilize and support the farmers' movement here, because it's going to have a bigger picture when it comes to the climate and peace and security issues that affects, all countries. Now, this toolkit was leaked, and the government, in all its maturity, if you may, decided to arrest Disha Ravi. She's a 22-year-old climate activist, and she was arrested in a very undemocratic way, because in parallel, we had January 26th, which is our Republic Day, and there were some clashes that happened, and Disha Ravi, who doesn't even stay in Delhi, which is the national capital, was arrested in relation to that violence, having no link to that violence. Why? Because she dared to speak about farmers' movements and their rights and relate it to the climate movement and get global solidarity. She went to court and said, if speaking in defense of our farmers is a crime, then I'm better off in jail. Now, the reason I'm stating this is because for a lot of us, we get called anti-nationals, terrorists. We are branded as enemies of our state and enemies of peace and security for daring to speak about feminist issues, about climate issues, about humanitarian issues. Because when you do this work on ground, there is a direct person you are speaking against. There is corporate interest. These insecurities don't happen in vacuum. They don't happen by happenstance. It's deliberate. And there is corporate interest behind the scenes, as well as political leaders who do not want to address these insecurities. So when you're challenging this, and it comes to civil society, when they're challenging this, what is happening? We're speaking against leaders. We're speaking against status quo who are failing people, who are failing to impose security, not impose, enforce security. So when we talk about protection, we have to be very real in accounting for whom are we protecting people against. More often than not, it's against bad faith state actors. So then comes the question of solidarity, then comes the question of participation. And here it is incumbent upon us, when we have these conversations, to one, have intellectually honest conversations, and two, also then stand in solidarity against those who are not voiceless, but whose voices are being actively ignored or silenced, as Arundhati Roy says. So that's just one thing that I wanted to state. And also when it comes to violence against women, we have laws that are just fundamentally discriminatory. There are many, it's known, it's a fact, that violence against women more often than not is perpetrated by someone known to the person, right? And in many countries, marital rape is not a crime. So as women, we have institutional barriers. We also have legislative barriers that, as Ambassador Chan said, that do not recognize our agency. So how do we deal with all of this if we are not getting the right answers from our respective leadership? It has to be with global solidarity, with a sense of urgency and a sense of also an unapologetic truth in saying the people on the front lines, the activists, the humanitarians are doing the work for all of us. All we can do is at least amplify their voice. And if they are being jailed, threatened, prosecuted for the work that they're doing, we support them and demand that they are released.
Thank you. And this actually leads very well into one of the questions that we've received. It's from a woman in Bangladesh, and she mentioned that she was she created the first online platform, women chapter for women in Bangladesh in 2013, and she was threatened and later forced to leave her country. So her question is, how can we work if we are such a soft target for also the what you raised, Trisha, the harsh political leadership pushing back civil society, pushing back women's activists. And this would then lead me to you, Linde, because, well, Sweden has been pushing what you've been calling the drive for democracy. How you can tell us a little bit about this drive for democracy, and also how the shrinking space and the sort of backlash for democracy is also, well, can be perceived as a threat to security, maybe on an individual level, of course, as Trisha mentioned, and the woman in Bangladesh, but as well between countries.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, unfortunately, the democracy is really on decline. And to talk about Naomi's question, what you can do, of course, this is a very, very difficult situation. And I think the most important things to do is to work together and form networks and form organization and make awareness. In the end, of course, threats should be handled by the police, but it's sometimes, and especially not in all countries, the police is not prioritizing these kind of threats and these kinds of crimes. You can see it in everything that has to do with women and threats to women. And now we shouldn't talk about that, but for example, when it comes to rape and sexual assault legislation, it takes a long and hard fight from women and women organizations to get more adequate jurisdiction in this. And when it comes to the drive for democracy, as we have in the Swedish Foreign Ministry, we know now that there is only about 10% of the inhabitants, worldwide inhabitants, that lives in full-fledged democracies. And you can see decline for activists, for NGOs, for media, for civil rights defenders. And that's why we try to support democracy in different ways by getting funding to research. And here I can give you a little tip. If you want to know more about democracy and the decline of democracy, just go to internet and look for VDEM. That is Variety of Democracy. That is the University of Gothenburg, who has an excellent homepage where you can find all kind of information about democracy. We try to support different kind of democracy defenders by, for example, democracy talks. We have had more than 100 all over the globe in our embassies and consulates, where we invite trade union activists who has a very, very big difficulties in organizing. They are getting harassed, even killed, just for organizing. Media representative, journalists, women's activists, LGBTI persons, to try to support them in different ways. And also we have human rights reports that we publish. It's very, very few countries who publish human rights reports systematically, but we do. And here we also have the issue of the situation for trade union. We also have aligned with this is our feminist foreign policy and our being a feminist government. And what it means is that all ministers in all areas are tasked with applying a feminist perspective to their policy areas. And in the case of the feminist foreign policy, our aim has from the start been to position gender equality as a peace and security issue, and once and for all dismantle the view that it's a women's issue. It's not a women's issue, it's a human issue. The working methods is the same. We look for rights for women, representation of women, resources for women, and it's having a systematic gender perspective. I always say, put your gender glasses on, and I hope in Sweden that they are already on in all areas. Of course, there are challenges, not the least when it comes to women, peace and security agenda. But let me take one example. As a chair of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, every year there is a meeting with the military advisors in all the countries. We have 57 member countries. It's the biggest regional security organization in the world. And I invited them on this yearly meeting to the Nordic Center for Gender in Military Operations. And I have to say that many of them were quite reluctant from the beginning because they couldn't see how could you have a women, peace and security and gender perspective on issues like military missions and so on. But the discussions were really, really constructive and good. And of course, it was also field visits with men and women in the Swedish army, and also discussions on what happened if you don't have a gender analysis, if you go to a mission in Mali, in Iraq, in other countries. I have to say that it's very, very useful, and I hope that more countries will follow our example. Right now, there are 5 other governments who has formally declared themselves having a feminist foreign policy. It's Mexico, France, Spain, Luxembourg, and Canada. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you very much. And it seems as if this might be the start of also a feminist defense policy in Sweden, as we have a feminist foreign policy, and I know also a feminist perspective to our trade policies. So this might be the next step. I would like to turn back to you, Ambassador Chan, sort of being in New York, in the UN system, so to say. We hear how civil society and women's activists find it more and more hard to also push the women peace and security agenda, or a feminist approach in their respective countries due to the shrinking space and also the backlash of democracy. When it comes to the multilateral cooperation, how do you perceive the cooperation on this agenda for women, peace and security? Is there a strong emphasis on this and a strong support within the countries of the United Nations?
Thank you, Anne. This is a wonderful question. I'll tell you, one of the major problems that we have here at the UN is that we continue to speak and work in silence. So there's consensus in third committee that women's participation, and even at the Security Council, it's vital for peace processes, for sustainable development, to uphold their human rights. When you transfer that discussion to the first committee and you request to recognize that there is a gender impact on the transfer and use of small arms allied weapons, that consensus collapses. Last PMS 7, which is the biannual meeting of state parties for the Program of Action on Small Arms Allied Weapons, Costa Rica led a movement of 64 member states to protect the gender language in that outcome document. And because of those numbers, we were successful in recognizing that gender is a small arms allied weapons issues, and small arms allied weapons have an impact on gender. But it was a fight. It was a fight with other delegations that refused to acknowledge that gender has an impact in excessive military spending and also on armed violence and armed conflict, or the other way around. But also, we noticed that there are countries in the Security Council that want to keep the WPS agenda only for the Security Council, and that is not the case. As I explained before, for us, the WPS agenda translates to everything that has to do with peace and security processes. And that includes representation to all the disarmament and arms control events that have to do with weapons. So we have the first committee, and the first committee, only 1 in 5 statements is delivered by a woman. And we have the upcoming the 10th review conference of the non-proliferation treaty, and then we'll probably will see again that women are underrepresented. But more than sticking to the framework that we already have, we need to rewrite it and address issues like nuclear disarmament from a feminist perspective. And it means to look at weapons not as source of security, but as source of confrontation. And that is part of Costa Rica foreign policy here at the UN. We're putting everything we can with gender lenses, from international criminal law to nuclear disarmament and not least small arms allied weapons. But it's a fight. Just to get a few words, like in July, to recognize that there has never been a female Secretary General. There was a 2-month fight to just get an acknowledgement that after the term of Antonio Guterres, this organization has been led exclusively by men. I believe that change is from bottom up. But if we can tilt that balance to the top down, I think that we are sending a good signal that change is possible, and all the efforts that our sisters are doing everywhere in the world have an echo in the walls of the United Nations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So a stereotypical male view on peace and security needs to be constantly challenged. Trisha, can I turn to you with also a question that we've received from one of our viewers? So continue to post questions. We will try to pick them up. One question is, what could feminist development and humanitarian aid do for international peace and security? I think it's a good question, as we are so convinced, all of us, we need maybe sometimes to sort of stop and also give his elevator pitch, so to say. Why is it so important to have a feminist perspective on also peace and security, and why is feminist development so important for international peace and security?
Thank you so much. When Minister Anne mentions Sweden's feminist foreign policy and cited the countries that do have it, Ambassador Chan calling herself a feminist, the truth is many countries' leadership do not associate themselves with the dreaded F word. It's still highly villainized. And, just before COVID, I was unlawfully detained and beaten by the police for doing the feminist work that I do. Disha Ravi, the young activist I spoke to you about, was trying to get to COP26, but her passport has been denied from her because of the feminist work that she does. And I say this because I appreciate the framing of the question, but the way I see it, the truth is feminist organizations, individuals who identify themselves as feminists are already doing all the work on ground, right? We're basically filling vacuum that political leadership has left us with. When tax representatives give their taxpayer money, it doesn't come to us. It goes to politicians. So I think the sense of accountability needs to be squarely on duty bearers and not right holders. Yes, we're accountable to function within a democratic framework, to function in a globalist society. But we have to be very careful about identifying who are the right holders and who are the duty bearers. So when we say what more can feminist organizations do, let me flip it around and say what more can world leaders and international organizations do to support feminist organizations. And I say it starts with one, financial investment and resources. We know the abysmal number that goes when it comes to supporting feminist grassroots organizations. So one, give your money to feminist organizations that are doing intersectional work. Two, again, I go back to do everything you can to highlight the voices of the most vulnerable, marginalized communities within these feminist spaces. And three, also, advocate for their protection, as well as making sure there's equal representation. We were talking about this when it comes to COP26 and the representation. Over 500 fossil fuel lobbyists had delegate passes, whereas you saw the troublesome picture of indigenous activists, of climate activists, most of them young, gender non-conforming people on the outside, just trying to navigate, trying to get in. And unfortunately, that's what politics looks like. Unfortunately, that's what the healthcare system looks like. Unfortunately, that's what humanitarian aid and feminist work looks like as well, where we're constantly on the outside, and then we're painted as angry young women, angry people, disfranchised. Truthfully, how can you not be angry at the injustice of the system that we're meted towards? So what can we do? Mobilize, be unapologetic, count on solidarity amongst each other, focus a lot on your mental health, because this work is hard. It punches you every single day. So focus on your mental health, mobilize, and get the money where you can. I think this is the question that needs to be asked of international organizations, grant-making organizations, to say, you are starting with the premise of not enough is being done to support, to fund feminist organizations, and what more can you do to open your wallets and be generous with supporting the work that's happening on ground.
Thank you very much, Trisha, for this very strong, urge to us all to make sure to fund and to support feminist organizations, and not the least also, of course, to form alliances, as this is tough and sometimes quite lonely work in a way. I would like to turn back to you and also pick up on the Maritza's point on a feminist perspective into disarmament, as I know that the Swedish government has also, is in the forefront of the disarmament issue, and also has initiated the Stockholm Initiative, trying to, evoke some energy into the nuclear disarmament issue. How do you see the feminist perspective into this, and how can Sweden and you yourself also be a beacon of the gender glasses also when it comes to disarmament?
Well, thank you, Anna. Well, gender perspective provides key insights into how women and men and girls and boys can be differently impacted by threats and crises. So applying a gender lens to all our work allows us to devise policies and actions that are more comprehensive, inclusive, consequential, and sustainable. So a woman, peace and security perspective is a key tool in these efforts. And let me mention some concrete example on how we approach the twin threats that you mentioned. In relation to the climate crisis, we use our position as donor to push for the integration of a gender perspective in the policies, strategies, and the work of the big climate funds. We have also enhanced work on the gender, climate, and conflict perspective throughout Sweden's development cooperation, as well as an interlinkage between the three perspectives. And in relation to nuclear arms, Sweden supports the Secretary General's Agenda for Disarmament from 2018, and specifically champions two of its topics. One, the dialogue for nuclear disarmament, and two, the full and effective participation of women in decision-making processes and multilateral disarmament platform. You mentioned the Stockholm Initiative, and that is an initiative for nuclear disarmament that Sweden, together with 15 other countries, are pursuing. The key objective of this initiative is to foster trust and build support for a pragmatic and result-oriented disarmament agenda with the help of we have 22 concrete proposals, so-called stepping stones, where one is to ensure full and effective participation of women and further integrate gender perspective in nuclear disarmament. And we will use this initiative, and many other countries, except those 16 that signed the first initiative, many countries has aligned with it, and we will work with it now in January, when the United Nations Non-Proliferation Treaty review conference will take place. And I hope that our initiative will be more well known, and that more countries will align, and that the nuclear power will show constructiveness in the NPT conference in New York in January.
Thank you very much. And well, I started by mentioning also the initiative on common security that the Olof Palme Center, together with the International Peace Bureau and the International Trade Union Confederation, has been launching, and that we are in a series of webinars now discussing different security threats and how to come back to an address that focuses on dialogue and cooperation rather than militarization and conflict, to put it bluntly. And thank you, Anne, also for issuing the close relationship between climate and security, as mentioned, called the twin threats. And we also know that, the Olof Palme Commission back in the 1980s, they were quite focused on the threat, the nuclear threat. And we now see how climate is sort of it has been called the slow suicide to humanity, whilst then nuclear weapons would be the more quicker version of an extinction of humanity. And we need to address these two security threats with, of course, great severeness, and also together to see how they also are interlinked. And the report that has been mentioned will be launched in April next year. So I would like to pose one final question to you in the panel. And of course, Trisha, you are also part of the commission. So this is for maybe the both of us to listen a little bit more carefully to both Maritza and Anne. But I will turn to you first, Ambassador Chan. What would you like to see mentioned in the report Common Security 2022 that we will launch in April next year, when it comes, specifically to the women, peace and the security agenda, but also, of course, more broadly? What would be your recommendations for our continued work in the report?
As expressed before, a recognition that WPS agenda does not apply only throughout conflict or post-conflict. It applies throughout every single process that have to deal with peace and security, and that include negotiations on disarmament, non-proliferation, and arms control. I would like to see an encouragement for countries to appoint women as head of delegations and to have more parity in the delegation as a first step. I would like to see a recognition that the disproportionate impact of weapons, including nuclear weapons, on women. I also would like to see that there's finally a recognition that nuclear weapons do not bring peace and stability, are not a sign of sovereignty. Actually, they're a threat to humanity. That we're spending $140,000 a minute on nuclear weapons during a pandemic, $140,000 that could be spent in addressing mitigation, adaptation, and climate change, or the empowerment of women in the global south. I'd like to see a recognition that these institutions, the rule of law, the respect of human rights, that is upholding international treaties, the source of security, and the core of the Agenda 2030 that is lagging behind already. I would like to see a recognition that women's voices matter, that we have something to say, and there are a plethora of experts that want a seat at the table and deserve one. Bring those women to your team, mentor them, and create a new generation of security experts that are able to address all the issues that we're facing today, because they are not rhetorical. This is a real threat that we are facing, while some states continue to refuse that the mere existence of nuclear weapons and granting them special status is their sovereign right. I call upon all member states and a recognition that the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is the way forward. That is the first gender-sensitive treaty ever adopted, and that we need more treaties that have a gender perspective and a gender language that must be adopted and agreed by member states. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'd like then to pose the same question to you, and in our continued work on common security, from your point of view, and also in relation to discussions that we've had today, what would be your recommendations and send-offs?
Well, thank you. I agree a lot with Ambassador Chan in this, and of course, I would like to see an emphasis on the women, peace and security agenda, and the need for a feminist perspective on peace, security, and development. Our own experience is that the feminist foreign policy has given us new and necessary insights and reflexes, including in the outbreak of COVID-19, when Sweden was often first and then in the beginning quite alone in the need for a gender and rights perspective in the response of COVID-19. And what we hear from the other 5 countries who pursue feminist foreign policy is that the approach has made a difference also for them. The report would be the right way also to point out the need for multilateralism. We haven't spoken about that so much in today's panel, but there is a challenge to multilateralism, and it's harder and harder to get consensus decisions. We see a backlash when it comes to gender. Even to using the concept of gender in a way that has been used several years before, there is a resistance. And I also want to finally say that we need a broad security concept. Security is not only about military equipments and military means. It's also about a society's resilience, about human rights, democracy, gender equality, and the rule of law. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Trisha, as being, of course, a commissioner to this work, we have, the both of us, also been listening, of course, to the thoughts and recommendations from Ambassador Chan and also the Foreign Minister, Ms. Linde. Is there any final words that you would like to conclude this seminar before we thank our guests for today?
Thank you. I think back to Juneteenth, the historical legacy of it, where in America, it wasn't up till June 19th of 1865 when the troops that arrived in Texas announced that slavery was abolished by an executive decree. All this to say that I really hope that the work we do through the report that we publish translates into real life change of people and doesn't just remain on paper. And I feel hopeful about that, especially with the conversation that I partaked in today with Ambassador and the Minister, and seeing that sort of honesty in calling out the fractures that we have to deal with, and also an urgency in the need to address this from a gender-sensitive approach. So that's what I hope for, that the words translate to real-life change on ground.
Thank you so much, Trisha, Shetty, and of course also thank you, Ms. Linde, and also Mrs. Maritza Chan for today's panel. And we will continue to work, and we are also having more of these webinars to dig into the security threats that we face in our modern world, and how the concept of common security can guide us for the future. So have a look also at our website, commonsecurity.org. And finally, thank you to all of you who have been listening and participating. And I hope to see you all soon again. Thank you.